Hi everyone, thanks for joining me. My name is Andrew and I'm going to talk a bit about how we're driving data culture change with data contracts. So I work for a company called GoCardless. In case you haven't heard of us, we're building the world's leading bank payment network. We're a fintech based here in London, and most of our companies and our customers use us for sort of recurring or subscription-based payments. So it could be a gym subscription, it could be your energy bills, it could be maybe recurring charity payments, things like that. And some of our big customers include people like The Guardian or DocuSign or people like that as well. Typically, we've been using direct debit to take these payments, but more recently, we're also one of the leading companies in the open banking space, using that for payments and exploring opportunities with open banking. So we're based in London, but we operate in many countries around the world. So you can make payments across international borders as well with GoCardless. In terms of how we're using data at GoCardless, we have three main areas really. One is like kind of typical analytics and forecasting that you'd expect, kind of company KPIs, revenue numbers, things like that. We also use data a lot to try and manage our risk. So as you can imagine, being a fintech and a financial company, we get targeted by forces quite a lot. So you have to manage that risk. We have a fraud model, try to identify fraudulent customers, and kind of block them taking payments on our platform. And we're also using data more and more to build data-driven products, I say, alongside our core offering. So a couple of examples of this include one we call Success Plus, which if a subscription payment fails, we'll try and predict when the next best time to take that payment is and schedule that payment again for that best time in the future. Another one we launched a bit more recently is something called Protect Plus. That's about protecting our merchants, our customers from being defrauded by their customers. I think what's interesting about that is that data is becoming more and more important to GoCardless. So because of the data we have, only we have the data we have, that allowed us to build products that no one else can build, and that kind of increases the capability of a product, makes us more useful and more attractive to our customers. And a little bit about myself. So I joined GoCardless now over 5 years ago. And when I joined, I was the first data engine hire. And when I joined, we had no data platform at all, really. So since then, myself and the team have built out a data platform from scratch. So it's been a really nice opportunity. And what we did is we kind of built maybe what we might term a traditional data platform these days. And that worked well enough to a degree, but with the same old problems. I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through the presentation. But we started having the same old problems, started hearing about it kind of week on week. We started thinking, well, there must be a better way to be building better data platforms these days. Like this can't be it. And through that thinking, around the same sort of time we started thinking about this, like data mesh articles started coming out and a few other things happening in the industry. We ended up coming to this place where we can come up with data contracts, can coin that term and start implementing it here at GoCardless. So I talk about what I was implementing a traditional data platform. This at a high level is what it looked like at GoCardless a couple of years ago. So it probably looks familiar to most of you, at least to some degree. We have, we want to build a data warehouse. One of the first things we did was build a change data capture or CDC service. What we did is sucked all data out of the upstream databases we had. We got all changes from all the tables, chucked them into a data warehouse with BigQuery, and from those changes, you could recreate the database state in the data warehouse in BigQuery. What we end up with in BigQuery is an exact copy of the upstream databases, all the same tables, all the same modules, all the same data. We then have our BI teams, typically BI engineers, use that data to drive all the analytics. So I have to do quite a lot of transformations of that data, a lot of complexity in there, a lot of logic in there, try and turn that raw data into something that's useful to drive the analytics you want to drive, or to drive these machine learning models, or to drive other internal services. And that kind of creates a bottleneck, as you can see in the diagram. We'll talk a bit more about bottlenecks in a little bit later as well. One thing I added on this diagram is this idea about responsibility and who's responsible for certain parts. Again, it's something I'm going to touch on throughout the presentation, but really product teams have very little responsibility in terms of the data that goes into the data warehouse. They just write into the databases. I don't really know what's going on beyond that. We then have a data platform or data infrastructure team that kind of builds the CDC service and chucks the data in and looks after that data, raw data, manages the data. And then you have a lot of responsibility on VBI teams or other data engineering teams trying to transform data into something useful. So something to bear in mind as we go through the presentation. And like I mentioned at the start, we kind of have the age-old problems with our data platform. I'm going to talk about what those problems are in a minute and how that led us towards data contracts. One of the problems we had is around lack of expectations on this data. So this data could change, the source data could change at any time without any warning. Maybe the structure of data changed, the schema changed, maybe the data itself changed, maybe some data was moved to the table, wasn't backfilled. These changes happen at any time without any warning, without any collaboration with any of the data teams. But lack of collaboration is another key thing that we felt was a problem. Like these data generators, we didn't even know about data generators in many cases. They just write into their own database, do what they need to do to build a, to meet the needs of their service. They had no idea how data was being consumed, what it was being consumed for, what value was being generated from the data. On the consumer side, they had no input in what data looked like. They weren't able to give their requirements. They just got what they were given. And this data that being pulled in by the T service really had no documentation. And usually you had to have quite a lot of in-depth knowledge of the upstream service. And it's typically gained by Slack conversations, by sort of people sort of who've been here longer, start trying to gain that knowledge. If you're a new joiner, you want to try and find some data, you really kind of lost and you had to go and talk to a lot of people, talk to people who've been a long time and try and work out what happened, if the data there, what kind of format's it in, can I use it? It's really hard to get started with data. The next problem we had was around reliability. I mentioned already that this kind of upstream data can change regularly, and when it does, it breaks all the downstream uses. That can be quite a noisy thing, so if they pipelines at 1 in the morning, or it can be more silent, suddenly you remember that your numbers in your dashboards have doubled, and you don't know why. And you have to go and work out why that is, again, typically by Slack conversations, trying to deduce what's happened. And generally, you can't reverse these changes. The changes you have made in the upstream database for a particular reason. That reason is valid and can't be changed. But then you start adding more and more logic to these data pipelines. Typically, case statements, if null, do this. If before this date, then use this field. If after this date, use the other field. And this complexity just increases the unreliability of these pipelines. They become more and more brittle. And what happens if you start having unreliable data pipelines is that people start to lose trust in the data. People consume the data, particularly in like Looker dashboards or in other dashboards, or people using the alerts from models, start to lose trust in those alerts, trust in those reports. And when you start losing trust, it's very hard to get that back. A third problem we had is kind of around quality of data. Now, the quality can mean many things to many people, but what I'm talking about here with quality is that it's just not in the right structure for the use case that we have in mind in data warehouse. Now, the structure has been designed for the transactional database, to meet the needs of a service. It's not been designed for data warehouse, which is where we're using it. Therefore, it takes a lot of transformation and a lot of learning to make use of that data. Again, adding to the brittleness and the instability of the pipeline. And the root cause of this is that data was not built for consumption. It's only been built for the transaction database. And we're just using it in a different way that it's not been designed for. So like I said, I'll be in meetings weekly, say, with like data scientists, BI engineers and BI analysts, hearing about problems week in, week out. And we started just thinking there must be a better way to be doing this. Like this can't be it. So that led us to data contracts. So what is data contracts? Well, the easiest definition is to think of it like an API of data. And on the surface, that sounds quite simple, but actually it's a fundamental change in how we build our data architecture. So what an API is an interface. And through an interface, you can start defining explicit ownership and responsibility, both from those generating the data, or providing the interface, and those consuming from the interface. You can set expectations, again, for both those parties, for the consumers, consuming from that interface, and from generators generating data for the interface. I'm going to talk a lot more about ownership, responsibility, and expectations as we go on. But if we do this right, we end up with data sets that can be consumed with confidence. And that is really the goal, because when you have data sets consumed with confidence, you build products that are reliable, that are trustworthy, and that are effective. So if we keep the idea of interfaces, we want to elaborate on that a bit more and define some principles that go alongside that. And if these principles, alongside the use of those interfaces, those data contracts, that allow us to drive a change in the architecture and ultimately drive a change in data culture. So first principle is around the interfaces, because I think the interfaces are really key. So we explicitly set expectations on what is coming through the interface. And this will be things like the schema, the structure of data, will be things like the SLOs, how timely the data is, how often it might be down, what the kind of support levels are for that data. It might be around the data itself, will it be nullable? Is it between 0 and 1? Should it only be between 0 and 1? Should it only be a certain sort of number of streams? We're starting to define expectations on what data is and how we should be using it. An interface is also, again, like an API, like any good interface, it should be versioned. And there should be a migration path as and when it evolves. And that's important because that allows the data to evolve without breaking anything downstream and do that in a much more managed way. And what we're looking for is a bit more stability. And what we find really is that data doesn't change as often as you think. So one of the things people think about with their contract is like, oh no, our data changes a lot. How are we going to provide contracts and interfaces around that? But in reality, it doesn't. So to give you an example, I mentioned I've been at GoCardless now for over 5 years, where I joined our core models around sort of payments and bank accounts and things like that. And in about 5 years, we expanded to many different parts of the world. We're now using banking alongside direct debit for payments. But these models are very much the same, really. We've got an extra couple of fields, maybe like from country and to country, or its own banking, true or false, and a few other fields. But really, they're much the same. They're very stable. I think that is the case for most core data sets, as soon as the company's got sort of product market fit. Then for the interface, we're assigning responsibility and ownership. And what we're basically saying now is that data generators are responsible for the data they generate, and we're saying it's fair data. And this is a change from what we had before, where kind of this exhaust, this kind of DDT pipeline, bringing data out, and from then on, it being that responsibility being passed on. We're saying no, it's your responsibility, and we're going to hold you to account of expectations that you're around the data that you're providing. You can set expectations. Your best place to do that is your data. You'll be held account to them. And you might think busy product teams don't want to hear this, and to a degree, you're right. But again, it's not as hard to convince them as you might think. I'm going to talk a bit more about how we do that later on, because that becomes part of how we change data culture. We want to move away from just chucking data into the data warehouse and happy for best, chucking all of it data in, and moving to deliberately generating good quality data. We want to be a lot more deliberate about generating this data. We want to generate it with requirements in mind, to meet those requirements from consumers. The idea of chucking our data in, kind of like ELT style, and through ETL somehow getting good value from it, I think that has been widely accepted. That doesn't really work. We see it with data lakes, chuck the data in, hope for best, end up being data swamps. Data doesn't end up being usable. And although you can say storage is cheap, it's not free. And if most of that data isn't being used, you're getting a very poor return on investment. So we're deliberately moving away from that and moving to a world where we deliberately generate good quality data. One key thing about the data contract is try and bring the generated consumers close together. I mentioned at the start how there's a real disconnect between both generated data and consumer data, what the needs are of each other, what expectations are of each other. So we really try and knock down those barriers, foster that collaboration. One thing we found is that consumers, they didn't feel like they could ask for better data or different data or missing data. So kind of having to teach them that it's okay to ask for that. But if you're going to be asking for particular data sets, you have to be comfortable talking about the value of generating from that data. I think sometimes we're not comfortable doing that. Otherwise, like the product teams aren't going to prioritize generating data that you need. And finally, we want to really promote autonomy. Autonomy, this is where I start giving back to data generators and giving them what they want from this. We want to remove any bottlenecks we have between the generation control of data. Don't want central data teams being in the way, central data infrastructure teams being in the way. Move to something a lot more decentralized. And we want to trust data generators to do the right thing, to produce the right data in the right format, with the right expectations, to meet the requirements of data generators. And this should happen just through conversation between generators and consumers. In the same way any other requirement from a project is met, data shouldn't be any different to any other requirement. We have these kind of 5 principles around data contracts. A lot of it around the interfaces that help define those in practice. And when you take all these principles, you take the idea of interfaces as kind of a core concept in your architecture. And all of this together gives you a very different looking data architecture. So if we look at the diagram again from the start of data architecture, GoCardless looked like a couple of years ago. We go from that, so it looks a bit more like this. And so a few things to consider in this diagram. We have the data contracts, that's the interface between each of these kind of boxes. These boxes could be data products, if you will. Each of these boxes have an assigned owner. And typically these would be a product team, starting from the left. And we're having the service hot plate data warehouse deliberately and explicitly. And this data warehouse is kind of our own part of data warehouse. So we're using BigQuery, so in BigQuery terms, I got my own project. And this is key because this gives that sense of autonomy, and then that leads to a sense of ownership of this data. Like, it's your data warehouse, it's your BigQuery table. If you want to give some permission to access that data, you can do that. You have to go and talk to a central data platform team to do that. BigQuery becomes responsibility, and so I manage that data. So we're asking product teams to take on a bit more responsibility. Again, I'll talk a bit more about how we can commit to that in a minute. But what we end up with, obviously this is simplified, in reality, you've got many more boxes, many more arrows. But what we end up with is something a bit more like a supply chain of data, go from left to right. And you might go into a BI project, they might do some transformations and joining, and that use that for analytics. Or it might go direct from a product team to analytics. Say, maybe they're responsible for maintaining a dashboard that from a finance team use, for example. Or maybe it might go direct from a product team to another product team in terms of another internal service, or direct to a machine learning model. This can happen in many different ways. But the key thing is, contracts of interface, trying to limit the supply chain as much as possible, give responsibility to those who are generating data, those who know data best. So hopefully all that sounds great. We've got this great new architecture, it's a bit more decentralized, we've removed any bottlenecks. But how do you actually drive this culture change? Like building this architecture out and implement data contract on its own, it's not going to be successful unless you also change data culture to line up for architecture. So what I'll do now is kind of give 5 approaches to how we can change that data architecture. First one is to always keep in mind, like, start with why. So be clear on why you adopted data contracts. And you're not adopting, like, when you have a project to adopt data contracts, you might end up with KPIs that say, that track the amount of contracts you've got in production or the amount of adoption you have. But that's not the goal of data contracts, really. The goal is to improve data quality, to drive better business outcomes. And that is the ultimate aim. So you want to make sure you have good arguments around, how does data contracts adoption help drive good business outcomes? And one way to add a bit more weight to these arguments is to link to a company objective. Most companies will have an objective that requires good quality data to help meet it, or benefit from good quality data to meet it. So linking to that is a good way to add a lot more weight to your arguments. You need to engage with everyone, and you need to engage repeatedly. To do a culture change like this, you have to get buy-in at all levels, including kind of leadership levels. And this isn't about just talking, it's about engaging. It's about getting people to really understand the problem you're trying to solve, really agree with those problems, and agree with the kind of solution you're proposing. And you're going to get a lot of people with concerns. You're asking teams to do more, they're already busy. You need to treat everyone's concerns as legitimate, have a lot of empathy. And if you do that, you can turn these kind of skeptics into real proponents of what you're trying to do with data contracts. That was briefly earlier, but you need to get a lot more comfortable articulating the value of the data. So we shouldn't just assume that data is valuable, and we can't just assume that, particularly when you're looking to prioritize data work like this and prioritize product teams to produce data. You need to be able to prove that it's valuable, prove that you can create better outcomes for your organization through better quality data. Again, if you can find stories to tell this, maybe you tell a story about how you asked for some new data generated, that fed into a feature, into your full model, that they've made it X% more effective. That's a great story that people can understand, no matter whoever they are in business. So think about these stories that can tell, really articulate the value of your data. But if you're always using the same stories, always trying to make the same points, eventually we're going to lose its impact. You're going to start falling on deaf ears. So keep trying to find different approaches, keep trying to find different analogies. I found the API analogy worked really well talking to engineering teams, but maybe for other audiences, a different analogy might work well, might work better. So try to keep that in mind, try to evolve your stories, evolve your arguments over time to reach different audiences. And finally, you need to find allies, ideally non-data protectionists as allies. Having data people ask for better quality data, it's probably not surprising. They probably hear it all the time. If you can find non-data people also evangelizing this, it's going to sound different. It's going to have a different impact from what you can have on your own. And the way to do this is to involve them as early as possible. So what we did is we involved some of the staff plus engineers that we've got in our software engineering teams, some of the tech leads in our business. I involved them really early, spoke to them about problems we're having, got them involved in the solution design, and that gave them a sense of ownership. That meant that as it started to get rolled out, started doing POCs and spikes, and started trying to deploy their contracts in the organization, they felt a sense of ownership. They were bought into it already, and they could make the case for it. Particularly important for them to make the case when you're not in the room, to other engineers, in the stand-ups, in the planning meetings, about why this is important and why you're using data contracts. So this is what I think data contracts is, or I believe data contracts is. It's a set of principles with interfaces at the center, using those principles to build up data architecture, and it's the set of approaches to changing the culture alongside a change in architecture. And if you take those together, you can really use data contract to start changing your organization to become a truly data-driven one that really does generate, gives us value through quality data. Well, thanks for listening. That's all I've got time for today. If you want to find out a bit more about data contracts or and how we're using it at GoCardless, I've got a few blog posts on my Medium page. You can also get in touch with me via LinkedIn if you want to talk to me directly about this. I'm always happy to chat. And yeah, find a bit more about GoCardless on the website. And we're also hiring if you're interested in joining us. Thanks so much.